Hi guys, and welcome to today's Patreon tutorial. So today's tutorial is going to be a little bit different because of the methods that I use. So I'm just going to condense it into a 15-minute tutorial because it is a lot of mixed media and experimenting, and I don't think it would be worth really making a full hour's tutorial of it if you guys don't have all those sorts of supplies. So there's such a large amount of supplies that I use that it would be difficult for you guys to go ahead and attempt it. And because I wasn't able to actually show you how I airbrushed the portrait, I don't think it would be as useful to you. But I'm still going to talk you through the process that I used so that you guys know what I did and how I experimented and how it turned out and exactly what I did. So the tutorial is of Chante. She is my April patron of the month, and her drawing is it's mixed. It's airbrush and a whole bunch of other mixed media, including pan pastel and colored pencil and a powder blender. So I got this colored pencil powder blender. You cannot use the solvent to blend, and I will get to where I explain why you can't use the solvent to blend because of the media that I'm using. So let's get into it. The painting is A1, so it's a very large drawing, a very large painting, and the reason I made it so big is because I've just finished an airbrush course. So I've done a portrait in black and white of Audrey Hepburn, and I had so much fun with it that I couldn't wait to experiment with the next thing. But I haven't done the colored part of the airbrush course, so I wanted to incorporate color using different methods. So I'd airbrush the patron in black and white first, and the bigger you airbrush, the easier it is to get the detail in. And the bigger you airbrush, the more realistic it looks, I guess, because it's harder to do fine details with the airbrush than it is to do bigger details. And then the airbrush takes up a lot of time. It doesn't take up that much time because you can cover such a wide area so quickly, whereas colored pencil, if you're covering an area that large, will take you a very, very long time. So it's good to be able to experiment with this and figure out how exactly you can still make this work if you don't know how to use color with the airbrush. And I love my color pencils so much, I don't think I'll ever say goodbye to them. So the airbrush is just a nice sort of base that I would like to use as a foundation for very large pieces. I don't think I'd go as far as using airbrushing for detail. I don't like it that much. I do like the fact that I can get a good vast area covered in a short amount of time, and then I can go in and do the detailing with a pencil. So that's really, really fun. And I did have a lot of fun with this portrait. It turned out really good, and I love the size, and I'm sure you guys will really love the size. And so let's get into it. Okay, so like I briefly described earlier, is I did airbrush the whole portrait in black and white. So I used a grey-based medium tone, and then I would go in and fill in all the shapes and fill in all the dark areas in the background and in the hair with my black, and then I would use a white airbrush ink to fill in the highlights on top of that to give it dimension and depth. So that is what you saw before I added any color. So to add the color to the skin, I'm using pan pastels. So I just bought a small set to experiment with it, and I love them. They give the skin such a smooth texture. You don't have to worry about your pencil strokes or anything. And the sponges blended in really, really nice. So that's what you're seeing me just use various sponges while I'm rubbing all over the surface of the skin, and I am trying to create those skin tones. So as I'm experimenting here, I'm noticing that everything still looks very dull. She looks very pale. So the skin tone that I chose is not going to be enough. I'm going to have to add more sort of pinks and oranges in there just to make her stand out a bit more, because I don't like how the skin tone still looks really flat. But the nice thing is that I'm able to go over the airbrushed areas with the pan pastel, and it still leaves that sense of depth, which is so nice because I've created those darker shadows with the airbrush and they remain there even though I'm going over it with the pan pastel, and then I can just enhance it more a little bit later. So now I'm using my pencils for the lips. Now I was mixing my Prismacolor wax pencils and my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils, and I soon discovered that I cannot use my wax-based Prismacolor pencils on this type of drawing if I want to blend it smooth. So I am using a colored pencil powder blender. I'll put the link in the description below. You can only get this in the US. I had a friend of mine in the US purchase it for me and have it posted to me because I couldn't actually get them to post it to me here in Australia. So for those in the US, you should get your hands on it pretty easy. For everybody else, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. Anyway, so this powder blender is more for oil-based pencils. So you can use a little sponge, dunk it in the powder blender, and smoothly blend your oil-based pencils, but it needs to be on a rough textured surface. One thing I have discovered with the airbrush, the more you airbrush, the more texture you create on the paper. It almost starts feeling like it's more of a sandpapery feel when you airbrush. It's very strange. I didn't know this until I started airbrushing and feeling the paper. So when you put your colored pencil down on this sort of texture, it has a lot of texture, so you need to be able to smooth that texture down. But you cannot smooth that texture down with solvent. Because you're working with inks and pastel powder, because pan pastel is compressed pastel powder, you won't be able to blend that with the solvent because the solvent is made for oil and wax and not for pastel. So pastels you blend with sponges and various tools, but you don't blend with the solvent. So I needed to find a different way of blending, and the colored pencil powder blender works perfect for the oil-based pencils, but it does not blend the wax-based pencils. The wax-based pencils just keep that texture, that really rough texture, and it doesn't blend. So I stopped using the Prismacolor pencils very quickly and just stuck to using my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils because I knew that the powder blender, after experimenting a little bit, would blend that fine on the surface of the paper, but it wouldn't blend the Prismas. So that's what I did. I used my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils to do the eye, and then when you see me using a little sponge, I'm either using the powder blender, or if I'm doing the skin tones, then I'm using the pan pastels. So now I'm coming in with pencils and defining the glasses a bit more. So I'm using my various shades of grey and black to give it this sort of definition and highlights so that it pops out nicely. And it's so nice because it was so much fun doing these glasses, because the more you create the glasses and the more you draw them, the more the portrait is starting to really become defined. So I didn't airbrush the glasses or anything because it's quite a sharp edge, so it would have been easier to do with the pencils. And then I did later on come back in with the airbrush to fill in more white highlights on the skin tone and to add a little more black in the glasses, because I found that my pencils weren't getting black enough. So I added the airbrush on top of some areas on the glasses later on, but I'll explain when we get to that point. So continuing, just taking note of my reference photo, I am creating those different shadows in the glasses, and then it's going to really start taking form. So I had to be careful, use a very sharp pencil when you're doing such sharp edges, because you don't want to go over the skin, because it's going to be very difficult to hide those dark mistakes if you make a mistake on the edge of the glasses. So there I'm using a powder blender, and I used a ruler to blend it against the ruler so that it doesn't make those edges all sort of jagged, so that helped make those edges nice and smooth. So the powder blender, I did find, does sort of mattify it and make it a little more dull. It's not as bright. So I came back in with my black pencil to try and add in more of the dark or black parts of the glasses, and I still didn't find like it was enough. I didn't find that it was enough, so I did feel like I needed to come in later on with the airbrush and just add or enhance those really black areas in the glasses, and that just made the highlights pop out even more. So still working on the glasses, and the more I work, the more I'm noticing that I feel like I need more highlights on the skin tone. So she's got quite a large highlight on her forehead and on her cheekbone, and I feel like I've sort of hidden it away with the pan pastels. But it's not so much the pan pastels that have hidden it away, it's the fact that I didn't add extra shading and extra highlights with the airbrush. The pan pastels literally just adding color, but the value is already there because of the black airbrush values that I put in there earlier on. So the more I'm working, I'm just adding details to the eye and trying to add more form and depth and definition with my pencils. And then I feel like I really need to start coming in with color. So now I'm getting to the point where I'm going to use my pencils to start adding those colors. I know that I can blend my polychromos pencils fine with a powder blender, so I'm not afraid to come in with the pencils and just add in those extra values. I know that it's going to be quite textured as I add the values, but because I have the powder blended, I will still be able to blend it quite smooth. So I need to add more color to the skin. And then I have an ivory Prismacolor pencil just here that I'm trying to use to enhance the highlights, but it's not working. You'll see me try and use it a couple of times, but it's just not enough to make it highlighted. I had to get to the point where I came in with my airbrush and the white paint on the airbrush just to enhance those really smooth gradations of highlights all over her face. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just going to continue building up more color tones and skin tones with my Prismacolor, with my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils. I really hope I didn't get that wrong any earlier. But yes, stick to your Faber-Castell oil-based Polychromos pencils when you are blending with the powder blender, because you cannot blend Prismas with this blender. So just keep that in mind. So still adding a little more shadow in that around the nose, around the mouth, and then adding more color around the forehead. And as I add these, I'm still hoping that it will create more definition in that. And it does. It's real subtle differences, but it does make a big difference overall. But I need to get in there with the highlights. So I don't show you how I do the highlights. You'll just see all of a sudden her face will look more defined. Her cheeks will have the whiter highlight on the cheekbone and on the forehead and in the glasses, and then you'll be able to see what I mean when that pops up. So now I'm focusing on the ear, trying to add some details there. Trying to highlight. And I made a mistake on the ear and I just couldn't fix it, so I decided to cover it with little streaks, soft streaks of hair, which ended up working out okay. So now I'm using my Prismacolor markers. So I'm sorry, I probably didn't mention that in the introduction of this video, but I'm using my markers to cover the entire area of the hair, and then I'm going to use my pencils to define different areas and strokes of hair and sections of hair. So she's got this sort of burgundy sort of color going on in her hair. So that's what I just covered the entire surface with. So then I'm going to start coming in with my pencil to add in those fine little strands or streaks of hair that just come out of your forehead, and that is what's sort of, they in random directions, different directions, and that adds realism to something, so I'm making sure to add that. Now using my pencils, I am trying to add in the different values and streaks in the hair. And I know this is all very difficult to see, but it's such a big drawing. It's really hard to work out my camera, so I had to do it all sideways, and then yeah, try and make it work out that way. So I'm gonna need to, if I'm doing something this size, gonna have to work out a different sort of camera setup so that it's easier for you guys to see what is happening, because this was as far as I could zoom out, so you couldn't see more of the portrait at one time, especially if I want to keep it in landscape view, because I can't do it in portrait view because the whole video is just going to be in the middle of the screen and it's just going to look even smaller. So this was at the time the best way I could record, and until I get another sort of tripod, I cannot do it any other way. So still working on the strands of hair, adding highlights with a lighter pencil, going in with my different color ranges to give more definition to the hair, and just building it up that way. Try not to use way too many colors when you're doing hair like this, because then it can sort of look like you've just tried to add way too many variations of color and then it starts looking strange. But try and use 4 or 5 colors, or just take note of your reference photo. I felt in the end that I could do more with the hair, but I felt like I was overdoing it. And the more I was trying to shade, the more I was covering the really black areas in the hair. And it would have meant that I would have to go back in there with the airbrush to try and darken up the dark areas, because the pencil just kind of gives it that matte look. It doesn't give it a very, very dark area or dark shadowed look. So, and there I blended with a pan pastel, and it just made everything very, very soft. Too soft, so I had to come in and do detailing in the hair all over again. So now I'm working on the bottom section of the hair, and this area is quite dark, so it's very hard to see those sorts of details, but I didn't focus too much attention on the hair, because as long as the shapes were in there and you could get the idea, I was happy with that for now. So now you can see the skin tone. Sorry, you probably, I don't know how long that's been like that, but you can see the cheekbones more highlighted. Right next to the eye is more of a highlight, and her forehead has more of a highlight. So this is really good. Her face has way more of a definition now. And you can see parts of the glasses are much darker because I went in there with a black airbrush paint. So now I just want to add a little more to the lip. I did fix the lip as well, because I made the bottom lip way too big before, and I fixed that with a white in the airbrush paint. Now I'm just adding all these last minute sort of streaks and sections. The jacket I did over here, I just used sort of little scribbles with my cool grey colours and my black colours, and that is going to give it a textured look, and it's going to make it look really cool. So it is a little bit difficult to see, but have a look at the photo that I put up of the final drawing, and you should be able to zoom in and see those little textures that I put in there. But the rest of the background is just black. Nothing interesting going on in the background. It's just black. I like the perspective of her face, the angles of her face, the way she looks at you. I really like this photo, and it's different. It's not just a straight on selfie sort of photo. I do like the different photos. So when I get my patrons to send me photos, I try and encourage them to send me something a little more unique or a little bit different, so that it makes the drawing a better experience. Okay, so just to conclude the video, the first steps that I took was airbrushing everything in black and white. I used a grey middle tone, and then I airbrushed everything in black. Apart from the glasses, I just put the shapes in there for the glasses. I didn't actually fill them in with the airbrush. And I didn't worry too much about detailing. I just wanted the base foundation down completely. So everything was middle tone in grey, and then I used my black to fill in all the shapes, and then I used my white airbrush to fill in all the highlighted areas of the drawing or painting. I then brought it to my drawing room, and I used my pan pastels to do the color and the skin tone. I used my Prismacolor markers to do the hair, and then I used pencil over the hair. For everything else, the glasses, the earrings, the nose ring, the lips, and some defining shadows around the nose and the eyes and the sides of the face, I used my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils only. The reason I used them only was because I couldn't, they were the only pencils I could blend with the colored pencil powder blender. The Prismacolor wax paste pencils do not blend with this powder blender, so that just didn't work. So I had to stick to using my Polychromos pencils from my Faber-Castell set. So if you want to blend with blender powder, make sure you only use your oil-based pencils. If you want to blend with a solvent, obviously, then you can use your Prismacolor pencils. But in this case, we couldn't blend with a solvent because we were working on an airbrushed and a soft pastel surface. So that is just the way that turned out. Also, something worth mentioning, after I filled in all the pan pastel and the first few layers of pencil, I sprayed everything with a workable fixative before I went in and added more details, and before I went and added in the highlighted airbrush pieces as well, just to make sure that the colors don't mix around too much. So the workable fixative allows for the texture to come back into the paper and for you to work on top of it without things being able to move around too much. So that is also something worth mentioning. So I don't know how much use you're going to find out of this video, but it was a lot of fun to draw and a lot of fun to experiment, and that's the approach that I took. And the nice thing to learn out of this is the fact that you can use so many different mediums together. The fact that you can add your colored pencil to airbrush pieces is a big bonus, because I was worried that airbrush should just be airbrushed and it's not that confident with using any other materials other than other paints. So I'm glad that it works so well with pencil, and I'm glad that I'm still able to blend my pencil on top of an airbrush piece, although I have to use a powder blender to be able to do so. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys soon. Bye!